The rain poured relentlessly over the cemetery, soaking the gathered mourners as they huddled under black umbrellas. A somber silence filled the air, punctuated only by muffled sobs and the occasional rustling of the wind. The funeral of Jonathan Reed, a war veteran and lifelong patriot, was underway. A simple yet dignified ceremony for a man who had dedicated his life to serving his country. But as the priest spoke his final words, a black SUV pulled up near the gravesite. The back door swung open, and out stepped Donald Trump. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Whispers spread like wildfire. What was he doing here? Jonathan's family, standing near the casket, exchanged confused glances. They had never met Trump. To their knowledge, their father had no personal connection to him. Yet there he was, standing tall, his face unreadable, hands clasped in front of him. The security detail that flanked him maintained their distance, allowing Trump to step forward alone. The priest hesitated, momentarily losing track of his speech, as the entire funeral turned its attention to the unexpected guest. Then, in a voice heavy with emotion, Trump spoke. "I had to be here today. Because this man, he did something that changed my life forever." The crowd fell into stunned silence. What could he possibly mean? Murmurs spread through the crowd. Jonathan Reed's family looked at each other, searching for answers that no one seemed to have. Trump took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the closed casket before him. The rain dripped from his coat, but he didn't seem to notice. His voice, usually commanding, carried an unusual softness as he continued. "Years ago, before I ever thought about politics, before I had the life I do now, I had a moment of weakness, a moment where I was stuck, unsure of my next move." He paused, as if reliving the memory. "And that man, Jonathan Reed, he was the one who gave me the advice that changed everything." People exchanged puzzled glances. Jonathan? Giving Trump advice? The man had been a humble veteran, never one to seek the spotlight. Trump's gaze shifted to the grieving family. "I never had the chance to properly thank him, and now it's too late." His voice wavered slightly, a rare sight for those used to his usual unshakable confidence. Jonathan's daughter, Emily, took a cautious step forward. "Mr. Trump, I don't understand. My father never mentioned meeting you." Trump gave a small nod, as if he expected this reaction. "That's because he never told anyone. That was the kind of man he was." He looked up at the mourners. "Let me tell you a story about a time when I was at a crossroads, and how your father was the man who helped me find my way." A hush fell over the crowd, and then Donald Trump began his story. The rain seemed to ease as Trump took a step closer to the casket, his eyes reflecting an emotion rarely seen in public. He exhaled slowly before speaking again. "It was decades ago," he began, his voice steady but nostalgic. "I was in a rough place, not financially, not in business, but mentally. I had just suffered a major setback, one that made me question everything. The kind of moment where you start to wonder if you're really as strong as you think you are." The crowd listened intently. This was not the kind of speech they expected from him. "I was in New York City, sitting alone on a bench in Central Park," Trump continued. "It was late, and for the first time in my life, I had no answers. That's when he sat down next to me." Jonathan Reed. A sharp intake of breath came from Jonathan's widow, Margaret. Tears welled in her eyes as she clutched her daughter's hand. "I didn't know who he was at first," Trump admitted. "Just a man in a worn-out jacket carrying a small duffel bag. But he noticed something that nobody else did. He saw that I was lost, not physically, but in my mind." The mourners hung on to every word. "He didn't ask for anything. He didn't treat me like a billionaire or a businessman. He treated me like a human being. And what he said next changed my life forever." Trump turned to face the family directly. "Your father looked at me and said, 'Son, I don't know who you are, but I've seen that look before. I've seen it in men who've been through battles they never talk about. But let me tell you something, if you're still breathing, you haven't lost yet.'" A hush fell over the funeral. The weight of the words settled deep. Trump nodded, emotion flickering in his eyes. "He told me that real strength isn't about how many times you win, but how many times you stand back up." That night, I went home, and I made the decision that led me to where I am today. I never saw him again. I never got to thank him, until now. Emily's lip trembled. "He never told us," she whispered. Trump smiled sadly. "Because he didn't do it for recognition. He did it because that's who he was, a man who gave wisdom freely, without expecting anything in return. The silence that followed was not from shock, but from deep, shared reverence. Then Trump took a deep breath and turned back to the casket. "Jonathan Reed, you were a hero in ways the world never knew, and today I say thank you." With that, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a medal, a military honor. "I pulled some strings," he said softly. "It took a while, but I made sure you got the recognition you deserve." He stepped forward and gently placed the medal atop the casket, and for the first time in the entire ceremony, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. As the medal rested atop Jonathan Reed's casket, a quiet sob echoed through the funeral hall. Margaret, his widow, pressed a trembling hand to her lips. Emily clutched her mother's arm, tears slipping down her cheeks. Trump took a step back, his usual composed expression giving way to something deeper: respect, gratitude, and maybe even regret. The room remained silent, but the weight of the moment spoke volumes. Then, a single clap broke the silence. It came from the back of the hall, hesitant at first, but then another joined in. And another. Within moments, the entire crowd was standing, applauding, not for Trump, but for Jonathan Reed, a man whose kindness and wisdom had changed lives in ways no one had known until now. Reporters in the back lowered their cameras, realizing that for once the real story wasn't about controversy or politics. It was about a forgotten hero finally getting the honor he had never asked for. Trump turned to Margaret, his voice lower now. "Your husband was a great man. If there's anything I can do for your family, anything at all, you only have to ask." Margaret, still overwhelmed, took a shaky breath before speaking. Just tell the world who he was. That's all he ever wanted, to help people, to leave something good behind." Trump nodded. "Consider it done." Then he turned to Emily. "Your father changed my life. I don't think I ever told him that, but I can tell you, you should be proud." Emily wiped her tears and straightened her shoulders. "I always was," she whispered. Months passed, but the story of Jonathan Reed never faded. The viral footage of Trump at the funeral led to a movement honoring unsung veterans. Inspired by Reed's story, a foundation was created in his name, the Jonathan Reed Veterans Support Initiative. It provided housing, mental health resources, and job opportunities for struggling veterans. Trump, staying true to his word, personally funded the first phase of the project. Other prominent figures followed, pledging millions to support the cause. But the greatest impact wasn't just in policies or donations, it was in the people. Emily, once the quiet daughter of a forgotten hero, became a passionate advocate for veterans. She traveled the country, sharing her father's story, inspiring change in the way America treated its soldiers after they returned home. Margaret found solace in the outpouring of support. Letters from strangers arrived daily, stories of other forgotten heroes, words of gratitude, and messages of hope. And Trump? Though he had attended the funeral as just another mourner, he left as someone changed. His speech at the dedication of the Reed Initiative's first veteran housing center was simple but powerful. Jonathan Reed was the kind of hero we should never forget, and today we make sure we never will. The crowd erupted in applause, but Trump simply stepped back, looking up at a newly unveiled statue of Reed, a reminder that even the quietest heroes deserve to be remembered. And somewhere, beyond the earthly world, Jonathan Reed might have been watching, proud, at peace, knowing that his legacy would live on.